Carl Jung predicted the collapse of Europe in a vision. Before the world tore itself apart in war, he saw a sea of blood rising, washing over the land. Not in a newspaper, not in a meeting room, in his mind. And then the flood came. So let me ask you this. Have you ever had a dream so vivid it made you afraid to speak it aloud? Not because it was strange, but because it felt more real than the world you woke up to. In 1913, Carl Jung had one of those dreams. And it didn't leave him, it followed him into daylight. It wrapped itself around his thoughts like a fog. It turned the ground beneath him into a question. He thought he was going mad. For weeks the visions kept coming. A flood, a hero slain, darkness descending. Made no sense, it wasn't rational. But neither was the war that erupted months later. The war that looked almost exactly like what Jung had seen in his dream. And instead of pushing it away, Jung did something radical. He listened. He allowed himself to fall, not into madness, but into meaning. He stopped trying to understand his mind from the outside and stepped into it from within. What he found there changed everything we thought we knew about the psyche. Because beneath the ego, beneath the personality you build and polish and present to the world, there is a hidden architecture, a symbolic world. A place where fire speaks, mirrors crack, and silence isn't empty, it's alive. And to reach that place, something first has to break. Sometimes it's a dream, sometimes it's a grief. Sometimes it's a sentence you weren't supposed to hear. But when it happens, it changes you. Because the mirror you've used to see yourself your whole life suddenly cracks, and on the other side, something begins to look back. Jung wrote, "My foundations are mired in madness. Life itself has no rules." That wasn't an admission of defeat, it was an invitation. He began to record his visions, page after page of images, colors, dialogues, and dissent. It wasn't analysis, it was conversation, not science, not storytelling, something older, something holy. And what emerged wasn't chaos, it was a map. A descent into a world that many of us visit in dreams, in breakdowns, in flashes of memory we don't know how to name. But here's what no one tells you. That descent is not a detour, it's a doorway. Because what Jung discovered, and what we forget far too often, is that altered states of consciousness, whether they come through dreams, depression, vision, awe, or pain, are not disruptions, they're thresholds. And if you walk through them, you don't just learn more about your mind. You meet what's been living underneath it all along. So I'll ask again, have you ever felt something crack beneath the surface? Have you ever stared into the dark and felt it wasn't empty but waiting? If so, you're not breaking, you're remembering. Because sometimes when the mirror shatters, it's not your world ending. It's your soul beginning to speak. And if you listen closely, you might just hear the life that was waiting for you on the other side of understanding. He didn't expect them. He wasn't trying to conjure anything or to create characters or to write a story. He was trying to survive. But in the silence of his descent, in that fragile space between dreaming and waking, they appeared. The first was Philemon, an ancient man with the wings of a kingfisher and the stillness of deep time. He didn't speak like a dream figure. He didn't obey Jung's thoughts, he challenged them, he corrected them. He brought a kind of truth that shook Jung from the inside. Jung said, Philemon represented a force that was not myself. He said things I had never consciously thought. And that's when everything changed. Because Jung realized that the mind wasn't a monologue. It was a temple, a theater, a cathedral filled with voices he didn't invent but could finally hear. Then came Salome. Blind, beautiful, full of longing and mystery. She moved with danger and tenderness as if she was both wound and medicine, and Elijah and the serpent. And the soul herself, who spoke not in theory but in urgency. A presence that had always been there, waiting for Jung to stop interpreting and start listening. He didn't call them hallucinations, he called them real, not real like objects, real like meaning, real like grief. Real like the way your chest tightens when someone says exactly what you've been afraid to admit. Because that's what archetypes are. They're not inventions, they're encounters. They rise when the ego loses control. They speak when the world goes quiet. They show themselves in dreams, in fear, in longing, in awe. They live beneath language. And when you enter altered states, when your normal mind gives way to something older, you meet them, not as metaphors, but as mirrors. So let me ask you, have you ever heard a voice inside you say something you couldn't have known, but needed to hear? Have you ever seen a face in a dream that felt like it had been watching you for years? Have you ever written a sentence and stared at it, knowing it came from a part of you that wasn't trying to be clever, but honest? Then maybe you've already met them. Maybe you've already heard the whisper of the archetypes. Jung didn't create them. He recognized them. They are the sage, the wild woman, the shadow, the lover, the healer, the trickster. They walk through your imagination like strangers, but they are you, all of them. The parts you've shown and the parts you've buried. The wounds and the wisdom. And if you feel crazy for hearing them, don't. Because crazy is just what we call people who remember too much of what the world taught them to forget. You're not imagining things, you're being invited. And what waits behind that voice you keep dismissing is a self that has been waiting your whole life for you to finally come home. There is a silence that comes before collapse. It's not loud, not chaotic, it's subtle, almost polite. But you feel it, the way a room feels before something breaks. That's where transformation begins, not in triumph, in unraveling. We're told change is clean, enlightenment is peaceful. Growth is inspirational, but that's not how it actually feels. Real transformation begins like a betrayal. Like a betrayal by life, or worse, by yourself. Jung didn't ascend into wisdom, he descended into confusion. After encountering Philemon, after recording the images flooding his consciousness, he didn't get clarity, he got disorientation. He stopped being able to explain himself to others. He no longer fit into polite conversations. He withdrew, not to run, but to survive. Because something deep was burning. That fire would reshape everything. It was the same descent found in the oldest myths, the kind of stories we only half remember because they're too close to our own truth. Like Inanna, the Queen of Heaven, stripped bare at every gate on her way to the underworld. Every layer of identity taken from her. Her crown, her robes, her voice, until nothing remained but her death on a hook. And only then was she reborn. But this isn't just a myth. Let's make it real. You've felt this, you've lived it. Maybe it was the day your body finally broke down from stress you never spoke aloud. Or the night you stood in the kitchen alone, hands shaking, staring at the sink like it might answer the questions no one else could bear to hear. Maybe it was the year you kept smiling for everyone else while inside you were quietly disintegrating. And no one noticed, maybe not even you. Until the moment came when the rolls cracked. When the words wouldn't come. When your chest tightened and your breath turned shallow and you realized you didn't know how to go back to who you were before. That's the fire, that's the fog. That's not the edge of madness, that's the doorway. Because it's in that breakdown that the archetypes emerge. That's when the shadow steps forward. That's when the voice you've silenced your whole life suddenly says now. Jung wrote about this moment not as a breakdown, but as a necessary death. He knew that the psyche doesn't evolve through theories, it evolves through dismemberment. And in some cultures they name this exactly as it is. In Siberian shamanic rites, the initiate is spiritually torn to pieces. Visions of the self dismembered, limbs scattered, organs removed, blood spilled on sacred ground. Horrifying but necessary. Because only in that sacred undoing can the new body be woven together. They don't call it a curse, they call it a beginning. This is what modern life forgets. We label pain as error, we pathologize inner collapse. But what if the collapse isn't malfunction? What if it's an invitation to finally meet what's real? What if the voice in the fog isn't trying to scare you, but wake you? Vasilisa entered the woods with only a doll in her pocket and fear in her stomach. She faced the bone-fenced hut of Baba Yaga, the wild crone of the forest. And Baba Yaga gave her impossible tasks, not to punish her, but to break her open. Vasilisa passed each trial not with knowledge, but with presence. And when she returned from the forest, she brought back not just fire, but fire that knew what to burn. Transformation is not about answers, it's about purification. And purification always costs something. Something you thought you couldn't live without. But you can, you are right now. And if you're walking through the fog, if your life has stopped making sense, if every part of you is screaming for clarity, but none arrives, please hear this. You are not broken, you are becoming. And the fire that scares you is the same flame that will shape the life waiting on the other side. Let it burn, let the fog take you. And when you emerge, because you will, don't come back as who you were. Come back carrying the light. There's a strange quiet that follows the fire. Not relief, not joy, something gentler. A breath that doesn't feel borrowed. A silence that doesn't feel empty. A recognition. Jung didn't escape the depths by fighting his demons. He learned to sit with them, name them, speak to them as equals. And in doing so, he discovered something that would change not only his life, but the way millions understand the mind. He realized the psyche wasn't a battlefield, it was a conversation. The archetypes were never enemies. They were exiled parts of himself waiting to be welcomed home. Philemon didn't vanish, he stayed. Salome, Elijah, the serpent, they became part of the inner council. Not because Jung conquered them, but because he finally saw them clearly and gave them a place. This is integration. Not perfection, not purity, wholeness. It's the return of the fractured self to the center. Not as one polished persona, but as a circle that includes all things, light and shadow, wound and wisdom, child and elder. And in this return, a different kind of peace begins. It's the peace of knowing you no longer need to perform. It's the quiet strength of someone who's walked through their own storm and stopped pretending they didn't. But this is not just Jung's journey, it's yours. Because you've met the archetypes too. You've felt the shadow when shame pulled you into silence. You've heard the voice of the sage in moments you can't explain, when clarity arrived without a reason. You've felt the warrior wake up inside you when life cornered you and said, choose. You felt the child when something beautiful made you cry and you didn't know why. These are not stories, they are inner companions. And when you make space for them, not just in dreams, but in your waking choices, you begin to change, not into something else, but into yourself. And this is what the Persian mystic Attar revealed in his poem, The Conference of the Birds. A group of birds sets off in search of the Simurgh, their perfect king. They cross valleys of fire, dust, loss, longing. Most don't survive, but 30 make it. And at the end of the journey, they don't find a god, they find a mirror, Saimo. It means 30 birds. They had become what they sought, that's the mystery. That the thing you've been chasing is you. The wholeness you long for. The voice you hope someone else will speak. The meaning you wait to be handed. It's already in your chest, whispering beneath the noise. The path is not outward. It's inward, always inward. And when you begin to listen not to what's loud, but to what's true, you'll find that integration isn't a destination, it's a remembering. You don't become someone new. You remember who you were before the world told you who to be. You remember that you're not just a face, you're the mirror, you're the sky, you're the bird. And you've been flying toward yourself this whole time. Maybe by now a part of you is starting to feel it, that strange tension between wonder and doubt. You've followed the descent, you've heard the voices. You've remembered the fire, the mirror, the silence, and still something inside you whispers, what if I made it all up? What if this is just imagination? Even Jung had that doubt. He asked himself, are these images delusions? Am I collapsing inward? Or am I discovering something the surface world was never built to explain? The world offers answers. Science especially has its story. It says the mind is a machine, that visions are just neurons dancing in darkness. That dreams are the garbage disposal of thought, that symbols are leftovers of myth, and myth is just ancient misunderstanding. It says you're not hearing your soul, you're hearing your synapses. And that's not wrong. The brain does create images. Emotions do ride chemical waves. The archetypes can be mapped onto evolutionary patterns. Our fear of snakes, our love of mothers, our hunger for stories. But here's where that story breaks down. Because even if it's all in the brain, what does that change? When a dream makes you weep, when a whisper in the fog tells you to forgive someone you thought you'd never forgive, when a figure appears in your sleep and reminds you of a truth you didn't know you'd forgotten, does it really matter where it came from? If the voice inside you saves your life, is it less real because it came from inside? Carl Jung didn't care whether Philemon was real in the scientific sense. What mattered was that Philemon spoke truth, that he transformed him, that he showed him what his conscious mind couldn't. James Hillman once said, the gift of an image is that it gives you a place to watch your soul. Maybe that's the only definition of real we need. That which awakens us is real. That which makes us more whole is real. That which calls us deeper into ourselves, even if it terrifies us, even if it comes wearing the face of myth or madness or memory, that is real. So when that voice comes, quiet, sacred, irrational, don't rush to explain it away. Don't let the world convince you that the only truths that count are the ones you can measure. Because the soul doesn't traffic in proof, it traffics in transformation. And if the dream changes you, if the vision sobers you, if the symbol heals a wound you didn't know you had, then maybe it doesn't matter if it was fiction or fact. Maybe the deeper question is this, did it bring you home? Because not all truths were made to be proven. Some were made to be lived, and the only test is this: are you more yourself now than you were before? If the answer is yes, then welcome back. You're not crazy, you're just finally starting to listen. It doesn't end with answers, it ends with a return. After the descent, after the fire, after the voices and the fog, what remains isn't a conclusion, it's a stillness, a moment, a knowing. You walk back into your life and everything looks the same. But something's changed, the way the light hits the floor, the way silence feels sacred now, the way your own thoughts no longer shout over the quiet truth inside you. You've walked through your own underworld, and you didn't just survive it, you were remade by it. Jung returned from his descent not with a new dogma, but with a new wholeness. He no longer needed to be one thing, he became many: the wise man, the wounded child, the seeker, the mystic, the mirror. Because the goal was never purity. It was unity, to bring all of it home. And now maybe you understand why the mirror had to crack, why the flood had to come, why the serpent had to speak, why the fire had to burn. Because you weren't meant to be perfect. You were meant to be whole. You were meant to remember. And that remembering doesn't come from climbing higher. It comes from descending deeper into your fear, into your dreams, into the quiet voice you've been taught to ignore. That voice was never wrong. It was just early, waiting, hoping, knocking softly from the inside, telling you that the person you thought you were is too small for the life that's trying to be born. And now that life has begun, you've seen what's underneath. You've heard what speaks when everything else is silent. You've walked with archetypes, danced with shadows, lit candles in caves no one else could enter for you. And you came back, changed. So when the next mirror cracks, don't flinch. When the next dream feels too big, don't run. When the next silence starts to hum with meaning, don't dismiss it. Follow it, through the fog, through the fire, through the voice that's been calling you back from the edge all this time. Because now you know, you were never just the dreamer. You were never just the seeker. You were the symbol. You were the story. You were the mirror. And it cracked so you could finally see that the door was never locked, because the door was always inside.